Learning Target 5.5 in this checkup just gave me these, or in this review, sorry, just gave me these boxes, box and whisker plots, and it's asking me to do some comparisons between them. So what I'm going to do first, before I do anything else, is to actually just sort of calculate the things that they're talking about and get a feel for what those numbers are. So what I did on my paper, and I won't fully do it here, but what I did on my paper was I went and I took sort of a straight edge and I went down just to get a good feel for where that value was. And I labeled this D1 and D2 so I could talk about them using those labels. So for D1, I calculated the following. I said my 5-number summary, and this is an estimate based on, again, trying to bring this down and estimate where it falls. The minimum I thought looked like it was 32, or pretty close. And then the first quartile is at 53. That's the edge of this edge of the box. And then 73 was the median. The third quartile was 82, and the maximum was at about 99. Now, the range, if I use those as my values, the range of that data is 99 minus 32. So my range ends up being 67. My interquartile range is the width of the box, so the third quartile minus the first one, so 82 minus 53 gave me an interquartile range of 29, and my median, again, was already in my 5-number summary, but to think about it a little bit, my median was at 73. For the second set of data, my 5-number summary that I estimated was 24, 78, 80, 90, and 98. My range, again using these estimates, my range is 98 minus 24. Notice how I'm showing this work. So my range was 74. My interquartile range, again, the third quartile minus the first, was 90 minus 78, which is 12. And then my median, again, which is part of my 5-number summary, but just to pull it out and take a look at it, my median is 80. Now, while the upper number, the maximum for the first one, looks like it's just like 1 point past the second one. And while someone scored lower on this test, the lowest score on the D2 class is lower than the D1 class. In general, the scores for the D2 class are higher. Remember that quartiles separate the data into roughly quarters, so 25%, which means this whisker on D2, about 25% of the class's scores fell below a C+, which means 75% of the scores in the second class are, if we think of a 78 roughly as a C+, are a C+ or above. Whereas the second class, even though the lowest score wasn't as low, and the higher score was maybe 1 point higher, there's a much broader distribution of scores, and not nearly as many students scored well. 50% of the class scored between about a 53% F and about an 82% B minus. And actually half of the class scored below the median of 73. So half of the class scored below a 73, whereas this class, 3/4 of the class scored above a 78. So the extremes are actually in favor of the first class. The low's not quite as low, the high's a little bit higher, but in general, the actual distribution of scores, these are much more tightly packed because this box is much more narrow. So the middle 50% of the scores are much closer to each other. And in general, the scores as a whole are higher than they were for D1. So what I wrote, and it's not necessarily the only thing you could write, but I did these calculations, and I thought about what that really meant, and I said, while D2 has the lowest score and D1 has the highest score, 75% of D2 scores are higher than D1's median score. As a whole, the D2 student scores were higher, with 75% of them earning a C+ or better. For D1, 75% of the students earned below a B- or below. Because again, 75% here, this is 75% of this class, and they earned from a low 80s, and I said about 82 or below. So they actually didn't score as well.